Welcome to Sales Whiteboard Workout, where we talk about the sales topics to empower you to win the sales game. I'm your host, Julian Redding, and would like to thank you for taking the time to spend with me today. Now, today's subject is one of sales process. Now, there are loads of methodologies out there, all of them very good. But here's one I'd like to recommend. It's called MEDDPICC. And MEDDPICC works in a very effective way to qualify opportunities. For me, this is the immutable law of selling. So without further delay, let's dive in and have a look at the details. Okay, let's start by going through a brief introduction to the MEDDPICC sales methodology. M stands for metric. This is where we look at the economic impact of the solution that we are selling. E stands for economic buyer. This is the person who has ultimate profit and loss responsibility for the project. The first D is decision criteria, where we look at their technical, vendor, and financial criteria. The next D is the decision process. Then what happens? What's our points of definition, validation, and approval? Then the paper process. Do we actually know who's signing, when they're signing, and what the steps are in the legal process? I is to identify pain. What are their primary business objectives? C, champion. Who will sell and promote on your behalf internally? And the final C is competition. Who are we competing against? So let's get into a little more detail for each stage. The M is the metrics of the business case. Here you're going to need to target and speak to someone in your account and quantify the business challenge they are experiencing or that you have highlighted through insights. The mistake I sometimes made here is that I could focus on a personal issue of a client. So it's important to ensure the metrics impact the business, not the person. It's important that the business outcomes have something in it for the person, but not the person driving. Be prepared to challenge yourself to answer all questions around the metric and how it will impact all lines of business. I would also suggest validating this with other positions and lines of business. Metrics can be cost savings or efficiency gains, revenue, profit, quicker time to market, or customer sat, just to name a few. So some simple questions to ask would be, how would you measure the success of your project? What metrics are there around cost efficiencies or business that you need to achieve? How would this success be measured by the business and lines of business? Tied closely to this will be the compelling event, and look out for an upcoming podcast where I go through the 6 elements of creating a compelling event. The information you get from this stage also acts as a fantastic reference point for prospecting in the future, really understanding the key metrics that drive someone's business. Look out also for my 5 Principles of Persuasion podcast, covering social proof on how you can use these references to your advantage. Now we're on to E, which stands for the economic buyer. Now this will be the person with the ultimate yes or no to the project. You need to identify this person early in the buying cycle and also their persona, especially how they make decisions, which I will be covering in an upcoming podcast about the economic buyer. It's important to align your messaging to their perception of value, goals, and their personal objectives. All this I want to understand as early as possible, otherwise there is a huge gap in the process, so use your relationships to leverage an introduction early. An important part here before the meeting is to do your homework and preparation. You need to be able to clearly explain the value proposition linked with real outcomes to earn the right for this meeting. So some qualifying questions here simply would be, do you sponsor the project? What does success look like for you? What are the next steps if we fulfill the success criteria? In this meeting, it's vital to set out your plan and agree dates against it. This will drive your whole success strategy. Look out for that podcast on the economic buyer, as I go into so much detail on this. I think it's so critical that they have their own show. The decision criteria. have we influenced and met their financial and technical criteria? Financial criteria is usually an ROI ratio, e.g. all purchases must have a 2-to-1 ROI ratio, whereas technical criteria represents the critical capabilities that the customer needs from your solution to support the overarching project. Meeting the technical criteria most often comes down to a simple yes or no. Can you support this capability or not? And sets the stage for the technical validation. By influencing the criteria, we set traps for the competition, and by meeting the criteria, we are well along our way to eliminating the competition. Some questions to ask customers for this step is basically, how will you decide? What are the technical criteria to make a decision? How do you calculate the ROI for this project to justify your investment? Decision process. Do we understand our customers' processes and the key players in the account? Now, this is going to be one of the lengthier pieces of the sales process and can incorporate two types of processes, among others, technical validation and financial or paper process that we'll cover in a moment. Technical validation answers a rather straightforward question: does your technology do what it says it will? Now, you'll want to understand who signs off on the technical validation, if an architectural board review is needed, as well as how often they meet, and who the key players are assessing or running the technical validation, as well as their allegiances to any incumbent vendor. The later is the process for when the customer is ready to move forward. Here, you will want to understand the processes for paper and money, who needs to approve, and how many signatures are needed. We're going to go on to paper process next. MEDDPICC emphasises the paper process. As sellers, we need to understand the process which a purchase request has to go through inside any company for such a deal to take place and execute accordingly. Anyone with experience in complex enterprise sales knows that interactions with legal department or purchasing could be a nightmare if they are underestimated, especially since these interactions are at the end of the sales cycle and the deadline for the PO may be compromised, whether it is end of quarter for the vendor or the implementation expectations for the client. These issues take time to resolve, often leading to a delay in the purchase order. It's absolutely necessary for the account executive to understand the paper process and anticipate any issues. For instance, you can avoid some issues by sharing your company's standard contract upfront with procurement. Oh, and quickly, if you haven't introduced yourself to procurement early on in the sales cycle, this can and probably will bite you at a later date. Some will tell that the paper, purchasing and legal process is part of the decision process, just like the technical approval process and the business approval process. Well, the difference is that very often the champion knows very well the technical and business processes all the way through to the economic buyer. But what they don't always know is the paper process themselves. That's why it makes sense to add it to the checklist to make sure we understand it and that our champion understands it, and we adopt a proactive approach with legal and purchasing departments to avoid any delay in getting that PO. Identifying pain along with the champion is critical in the inception part or discovery phase of the deal. The pain has to be relevant and felt. For example, it could be technical, not meeting terms of a contract, compliance, loss of revenue, loss of opportunity, shareholder pressure, etc., etc. For me, pain needs to have a direct impact on the customer's business in terms of risk, cost, lost revenue, or opportunity. This can often be defined as the compelling event. Please see my upcoming podcast on the 6 stages to define a compelling event. Another aspect a lot of salespeople don't consider is using pain to identify whether the customer is a fit for us. We don't want to waste valuable selling days selling against a pain that isn't felt or we cannot deliver against. Look out for my upcoming podcast about how to identify pain that really hurts, because this is key for us. If we can't sell, if they are not a fit for us, we need to move on to people we can sell to. Champion is our supporter who will represent and promote us internally. They are vital to identify early as they will drive advancement for us in the business. Do not necessarily get caught up in job titles here. Look for their influence. Your champion will share goals with you. They will help you really understand the pain of the business and assist in validating your solution or messages. The key is usually that we need to understand how they will be advanced by the project. I go into more detail about how to work with and develop a champion in my Creating a Knockout Champion podcast. So here's some questions to ask. What is the political influence of this champion? What's in it for them? What's their tenure in the business and who sponsors them internally? Are they really on your side, and what's their experience? These questions are key in qualifying, as your champion will be critical for you closing the sale. And the last is competition. Who are we competing against? What are our strengths and weaknesses? And most important, how does our client see our value compared to theirs? Because I passionately believe our competition are other salespeople from our competitors. If we are doing a better job selling to our client, understanding their perception of value, building trust, we will win every time. So we need to check what is our relationship status. Grade yourself against the competition. What do you think they are saying? I've always found a simple SWOT and political analysis works best here. So I hope you enjoyed that brief introduction to MEDDPICC and the stages. Do look out for those upcoming podcasts, especially the one on the economic buyer and pain, where we go into a lot more detail on those subjects. Just in closing, combine MEDDPICC with speed. Speed will work to actually focus on those activities. So in the explore phase, do the MEDDPICC qualification. It will then set you the task to execute with a date against. An incredibly powerful combination to help you win the game. I'm Julian Redding. Thank you for your time again and look forward to seeing you on the next one.